You are sitting in a lawyer's office, and everyone in the room thinks you're about to inherit nothing. You can feel their eyes on you, not with grief but with pity. Your daughter-in-law is already checking her watch. Your son won't look at you. And the lawyer, a tall man with kind eyes named Mr. Abernathy, clears his throat and says the words that make your chest tighten. We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Verity Ashcombe. Verity, your sister, gone 3 weeks now, and still it doesn't feel real. You look down at your hands, folded in your lap, the same hands that used to braid her hair when you were both girls in a house with no heat in the winter. Your nephew Thaddeus leans over to his wife and whispers just loud enough for you to hear. This should be quick. Aunt Verity didn't have anything. She lived like a hermit in that little house. I doubt there's even enough here to cover the funeral costs. His wife Delphine smirks. Poor old Rosalind, she says, glancing your way like you're an object of charity rather than a person. I heard Verity used to send her grocery money every month. Guess that well's dried up now. You feel your face flush with humiliation. It's true. Verity did send you money sometimes. Not because you begged for it. Because she loved you. Because you were the only family who ever visited her. Because when everyone else in the family called her the crazy old spinster who never married, you were the one who sat with her on Sunday afternoons and drank weak tea and listened to her stories about the war, about her old job at the textile mill, about the life she built alone after the man she loved never came home from overseas. You were 68 years old, widowed for a decade, living on a small pension that barely covered rent. And everyone in this room knew it. They knew you drove a 15-year-old sedan with a check engine light that never turned off. They knew you clipped coupons and rewore the same 3 cardigans every winter. They knew you were, in their eyes, poor. And now, in this room full of relatives, who barely gave your sister a second thought while she was alive, you were about to be humiliated one final time. In front of everyone, as the will was read and your name was, you assumed, barely mentioned. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses. Let's begin, he said. 3 weeks earlier, you had been the one who found her. You remembered the smell of lavender in her small house. The same lavender soap she'd used since 1962. You remembered the silence, the wrongness of it, before you even walked into her bedroom and saw her lying peacefully, as if she'd simply fallen asleep and decided not to wake. You remembered calling emergency services with shaking hands, sitting on her porch steps afterward, staring at her overgrown rose bushes, thinking about how she used to say, Rosalind, when I go, don't you dare cry over me in that ugly funeral home lighting. Cry over me in the sunshine. You had cried in the sunshine, alone, because nobody else in the family bothered to come until the funeral itself, and even then, most of them treated it like an obligation rather than a loss. Thaddeus showed up in a rush, muttering about missing a work meeting. Delphine wore sunglasses the whole service, more interested in her phone than her husband's own aunt. Your son Callum came because you begged him to, standing stiffly beside you, checking his watch every 10 minutes like grief had a schedule to keep. You were the only one who wept. You were the only one who remembered her birthday every year. You were the only one who called her every single Sunday for 23 years, rain or shine, whether she answered or not, just so she'd know someone still thought of her. And now, in this office, surrounded by people who saw her as a footnote, you braced yourself for the final insult, the assumption, spoken behind cupped hands, that you two were nothing, a poor old widow who'd wasted her kindness on another poor old woman, and would receive nothing for it but heartbreak. Mr. Abernathy began to read, To my nephew Thaddeus Ashcombe, and his wife Delphine, I leave the sum of $1 each. The room went silent. Thaddeus's face went white. $1? He said, voice cracking with disbelief. That has to be a mistake. It is not a mistake, Mr. Abernathy said calmly. Mrs. Ashcombe was very specific about her wishes. Shall I continue? Delphine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Your son, Callum, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at you with something like fear, as if he suddenly realized he hadn't visited Verity in over 4 years and was about to learn the cost of that silence. To my great-nephew Callum, Mr. Abernathy continued, I leave the sum of $500, along with my father's pocket watch, which I trust he will one day pass down when he remembers what family actually means. Callum's jaw tightened. He said nothing. You felt your heart pounding now, not with hope, but with dread. If this was how little the others received, what could possibly be left for you? You braced yourself for the humiliation. You told yourself quietly, in the deepest part of your mind, it's all right. You didn't help her for money. You helped her because she was your sister, and that was enough. But even as you told yourself that, some small, aching part of you still hoped, just once, that someone would recognize what you had sacrificed all those years. The gas money, the time, the love given freely with nothing expected in return. Mr. Abernathy turned the page. To my beloved sister, Rosalind Ashcombe Whitlock, he read. The only person who never once made me feel like a burden, who called me every Sunday for 23 years without fail, who sat with me through every hard winter, every lonely birthday, every ache of a life lived alone. Your throat tightened. You could feel every eye in the room turning toward you now. And for a moment, the shame you'd braced yourself for still crept in, because you assumed this tender preamble was simply Verity's way of softening the blow before revealing there was nothing material left to give. I leave to her, Mr. Abernathy continued, my entire estate. The room went utterly silent. I'm sorry, Thaddeus said, leaning forward. Her entire estate. Aunt Verity didn't have an estate. She lived in a 2-bedroom house that hasn't been renovated since the 70s. Mr. Abernathy set down the papers and folded his hands. I think it's time I explain something, he said. Verity Ashcombe was, in fact, one of my firm's oldest and most valued clients. She was also, unbeknownst to most of you, one of the first female floor traders to work independently out of this city, starting in the early 1970s, after inheriting a small sum from her own mother and turning it, over 5 decades, into a very substantial portfolio. Your hands began to tremble in your lap. She lived modestly by choice, Mr. Abernathy continued, not necessity. She told me once that she didn't want money to change how people treated her. She wanted to see who loved her without it. He looked directly at you. Rosalind, your sister's estate, including her investment accounts, the property in town she never mentioned owning, and a life insurance policy she'd kept current for over 30 years, comes to just over $4.1 million. The air left your lungs entirely. $4 million. You must have misheard. You must be dreaming. Surely this was some cruel mistake. Some paperwork error that would be corrected in a moment. Some cosmic joke at your expense. But Mr. Abernathy's face remained steady, professional, certain. Delphine's sunglasses, which she'd worn even indoors throughout the funeral out of sheer indifference, finally came off. That's not possible, she said, voice sharp with disbelief. She lived like she had nothing. She had everything, Mr. Abernathy said simply. She simply chose not to spend it on appearances. She spent it instead on quiet things, anonymous donations to the children's hospital where she once volunteered, scholarships for girls in this town who couldn't afford college, and apparently, he added, glancing at a separate folder, years of groceries and bills for her sister, who she believed never knew the true extent of her means, and never asked. You thought of every Sunday phone call, every cup of weak tea, every story about the war, the mill, the man she loved and lost. You realized now that Verity hadn't just been a lonely old woman living modestly by circumstance. She had been testing the world, quietly for 50 years, to see who would love her without expecting anything in return. And you had passed that test without ever knowing you were being tested at all. Thaddeus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. We're her actual blood family. We deserve— You deserve, Mr. Abernathy interrupted, voice cool and precise, exactly what your aunt decided you deserved. She was very clear about her reasoning. If you'd like me to read her personal letter aloud. Thaddeus went quiet. Mr. Abernathy pulled out a final sheet of paper, written in Verity's own careful handwriting, and began to read. To my nephew Thaddeus and his wife Delphine, in 30 years, you visited me 4 times, and each time, you asked about my health only after asking about my finances. I forgive you, but I will not reward what I would not wish to encourage. To my great-nephew Callum, you are young still, and I believe there is time for you to learn what your mother already knows. That love shown consistently, quietly without an audience, is worth more than any inheritance. Spend the watch's $500 wisely and visit your mother more. She loved me the way I always hoped someone would. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of paper as Mr. Abernathy set the letter down. And to my sister Rosalind, he continued, reading Verity's final words, you never once asked me for anything, and so I give you everything, not because you need it, though I know you do, but because you are the only person who ever made me Feel like being loved wasn't a transaction. Take this money and finally rest, sister. You have earned it in ways money can never fully repay. Tears blurred your vision. You thought of all those Sunday afternoons, sitting across from Verity at her small kitchen table, never once imagining that the woman pouring your tea could have bought the whole street you lived on. You thought of her old cardigans, her modest house, her simple joy in small things, and you understood now that it had never been poverty. It had been peace. She had built a fortune and then built an even quieter life around it, testing the hearts of everyone who claimed to love her. And only one heart had passed without even knowing there was a test at all. Yours. Thaddeus and Delphine left the office without another word, their faces tight with a fury they couldn't direct anywhere useful. Callum sat frozen in his chair for a long moment before turning to you, his eyes red-rimmed. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't know about any of it. I should have visited her more. I should have visited you more too." You reached over and took his hand, the way you used to when he was small and afraid of the dark. "It's all right," you said. "You have time to change that. That's the gift she really left us, not the money." The reminder. 6 months later, you sit on the porch of a house you never imagined owning. Sunlight falling warm across your shoulders, a fresh cup of tea steaming gently beside you. You used some of the money to fix the roof that had leaked for a decade. You used some to finally see a dentist properly for the first time in 8 years. You used some to fund a scholarship in Verity's name, for young girls who love numbers and dream bigger than anyone expects them to. And you kept some, quietly. The way she taught you, not to show off, but simply to finally rest. Callum visits every Sunday now. Not out of guilt, out of habit, the good kind. The kind Verity spent 50 years quietly hoping someone might build with her. You think of her sometimes, in the sunshine just like she asked, and you smile instead of cry, because you understand now what she always knew. They thought she was broke because she never spent her wealth on being seen. She invested it instead in being loved honestly. And in the end, honesty was the only inheritance that mattered. The world will always underestimate the quiet ones, but it is the quiet ones who are watching closest and remembering everything, and one day, deciding exactly who truly deserves what they leave behind.